I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I know it's weird to hear my voice first, but Alice is on her way to Alaska on a trip that's going to take like 20 hours. So we wanted to do some sort of instant reaction to the hearing today, the big hearing in the Delphi case. And we thought, what are we going to do? Who can we look to for expertise who might be able to help us on this? And who better than Bob Motta, the awesome host of the Defense Diaries, who was actually there today. So we're so excited to have Bob on the show. Hello, Bob. Introduce yourself. Say whatever you want to say. As long as it's not too critical of us.
No, I actually adore you guys. I'm super excited to join you. So I was thrilled. I was actually coming back. I had gone down to Delphi. I decided last night. I knew I was going to go, but I was still waffling because I didn't know if I'd be able to get in because of the whole fact that the documents are sealed. So I didn't know how the judge was going to handle that aspect. So when you hit me up, I was on my ride home, man. I was thrilled. I was over the moon to be able to join you. I've been dying to do this with you because it's such a good fit. I mean, prosecutor, former defense attorney. I think we'll have a blast. I think we'll have a really amazing conversation and we can kind of play off each other. So I'm really looking forward to it. If y'all don't know me, I have a little podcast called Defense Diaries. We are currently about halfway through our second season. It is unlike Brett and Alice's, where I know they'll do some 5-6 episodes on some of the bigger cases, but we're serialized. So it's one season is a long run. Our first season went 36 episodes. in retrospect, I would have done 2 separate seasons of that. I would have broken it up, but it was fluid. I just didn't know how long it was going to go, so. But we're very proud of what we put out. We feel like it was interesting. And because my father, if you guys don't know, was Gacy's lawyer back in 78, and he'd left me all his taped interviews, which Gacy had waived privilege. So that allowed me to be able to play them for everybody out there, the public, because I thought they were interesting. And we just interwove them within a narrative, trying not to focus on Gacy because that's been done over ad nauseum so many times. I really wanted to try to focus on the victims for once, because I never heard anything about the victims. In 43 years, I'd followed everything about that case, never knew anything about any of the victims. I wanted to follow the investigation, the arrest, and the trial. Those were the things that we focused on. And I do want to throw a rest in peace out there because a prosecutor who I admired massively just passed away. Bill Kunkel, who was the lead prosecutor on the Gacy case, just passed away on Sunday. At 81 years old, the man was a wonderful human being, and he was an amazing public servant, and he did a lot of good when he was serving the public. So he's greatly missed. And I was lucky enough to talk him into reading his entire, really performing at 81 years old, his entire closing argument that he gave at trial. That's how we ended the season, and it was incredibly moving, man. So I do want to say rest in peace to Bill Kunkel, and thank you, Brett, for having me. And that's my spiel.
No, we're so happy to have you. And as you can see, this is something we always talk about. Prosecutors and defense attorneys have a lot of respect for each other when they're both good at what they do and honest and straightforward.
100%.
And I know it's hard for some of y'all to believe that they're honest and straightforward lawyers out there, but they really are.
There really are. Just on both sides of the aisle, there really are. There's people that actually care about justice. And, the thing is that we need both sides to work for right. Justice to work. It's like prosecutors don't want to bum on the other side of the aisle because inevitably that, you worry about an appeal. If the guy 100%. Was ineffective on the other side, as a prosecutor, you want somebody that's doing the job properly so that that you had a good trial go down and everything was done properly. There's not going to be a bunch of appellate issues. That gives, I think, the prosecutors, on their side of it, it allows them to rest easier in terms of, the thing sticking. And you and I both know how difficult it is to overturn, a conviction in general, but still no one wants to go through that.
A lot of times the way it gets overturned is because the defense attorney is bad. I've been in a case once where the judge actually called the defense attorney up to him and was like, look, you're doing a terrible job. I'm really concerned that this is going to set up for an ineffective assistance counsel later on. You need to pick it up. And as the prosecutor, like you said, you're thinking, oh man, just get your act together.
Right.
The evidence
just
is there.
object
You're messing it up.
occasionally. Just occasionally object at least. Learn the rules of evidence so you can at least get something admitted. Learn how to set foundation. If you can lay foundation, you object. I mean, even if you're a terrible lawyer, you'll probably pass. But if you do neither of those, I was fortunate to never have that experience. So
yeah, I know.
I was usually having the judge telling me to shut up, sit down.
And just to, sort of transition to what we're talking about today, the Delphi case, it seems like there's going to be some good defense attorneys on the other side. I mean, just watching sort of some of the stuff they did today, I feel like these guys know what they're doing.
I got that sense too. And look, I'm not one of those guys who rips on PDs. My father was a public defender for 14 years before he went to private practice. And the guy was a heck of an attorney, and anybody that got him was lucky to have him. I mean, he ran the felony courtroom at the big courthouse in Chicago at 26 and Cal, as it's affectionately known, for a long time. And he came into that case with Amaranti ready to go, like far more experienced in heavy duty trial work in terms of representing the worst of the worst, far more than Sam was. So yeah, when I saw these two guys, and I hadn't heard much from them in terms of anything preceding today's hearing, I had done a little research on their background. I knew they were both private guys that had been appointed. So I was hopeful that they were going to be competent. And I thought that was kind of the impetus behind it. And I know in Indiana that you have to be certified in order to handle death penalty cases. So, and I imagine that this will be one of those. So they need it. And I imagine in that county, because I was in that county today, it's small. It's
they probably don't even have, they might have a public defender who handles the DUIs, right?
Exactly. So, because people were wondering why they went out, why didn't they just assign a PD? I'm like, because they have other cases, and this case is going to consume somebody for 2 years. That's the fact of the matter. And they just won't have time to handle all the other stuff on the docket. So
you were there. Why don't you just tell people, what it was like, sort of walk us through the day and how it all went down?
Yeah, so I should have left earlier, first and foremost. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get into the building because, as everybody probably knows, all the documents have been sealed. So the probable cause affidavit has been sealed, as well as the charging documents. And, if you guys don't know what the probable cause affidavit is, that's basically where the state lays out their whole case in terms of the evidence they have. It's a lower burden, for probable cause in terms of getting an arrest warrant than they need in order to get a conviction. So, but they still have to have, a substantial amount of evidence in order for a judge to say, okay, I'm going to give you the arrest warrant. And then they'll either get it indicted through a grand jury or they'll have a preliminary hearing down the road. So I got down there not knowing whether or not they were going to let us into the courthouse, let alone the courtroom. Got down there, got into the courthouse, was super excited. I go running up. It's like a very small, beautiful little courthouse, and it's kind of got a rotunda. So it's circular, and on every floor you can kind of look into the center, and beautiful old courtroom. So I go up there. There's about 5 people sitting out. I'm like, man, I'm going to walk right into this thing. This is unbelievable. I go in, and there are armed police officers everywhere, SWAT guys. I mean, there was an intense police presence there. So I think they're legitimately concerned about that guy's well-being, Richard Allen, because the presence there was.
If you've read anything online, they should be. There's a lot of people who are just ready to go ahead and end this without any more proceedings.
Dude, I mean, he had a vest on, when they were bringing him in and out, he had a Kevlar vest on. So, I mean, they were seriously concerned. So I opened the door, and then of course there's 2, they seem to be SWAT guys. Like they weren't just regular, plainclothes officer or plainclothes guys or just regular uniformed officers. They had some heavy artillery, and they were ready, and they're like, are you an attorney? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, who you're, and I wasn't going to lie, obviously. He's like, who you're repping? I was contemplating saying, well, I'm representing one of the news agencies, but I know I couldn't do it. So I'm like, well, I was just coming in to observe. And he's like, nah, he's like, we're full. So it was a relatively small courtroom. I wasn't able to make it into the room. I was hoping that they were going to have maybe a closed circuit TV for overflow, or I could watch the proceedings in a different room. But the main thing is it didn't really matter if you could get in or not, because the judge, the chief judge, had put out a general order. Phones were verboten. There was no using your phones. they actually had in the general order, if your phone rings in the hearing, that they will destroy the phone.
Oh, wow.
So they were taking it very, very seriously.
That's worse than sending you to jail for a day.
yeah. Exactly. That, like, talking about losing your lifeline. So, like, I wouldn't have been able to live tweet in any order. And that was really what I wanted to do, was get in there and live tweet, just because I have a different knowledge base than like your typical reporter. I would have been able to pretty accurately tell them what was going on in terms of my Twitter followers. So, but I hung in there. I went down to the clerk's office. I printed out all the documents that had been filed. I was able to get everything aside from the state's motion in support of sealing, because obviously that had information that was part of the information that's sealed. So I wasn't able to see that, but I got the media's brief in support of unsealing. And then I got the defense attorney's motion they filed at the 11th hour last night to modify the conditions of bond. So,
let's just walk through them in sort of order. Seems to me, I guess there are three things that are worth talking about. This whole thing to unseal the affidavit. The prosecution filed a motion for a gag order today, which is also interesting. I'd be interested to know what you think about that. And then obviously the bond request. Yeah. Starting with the motion to unseal the probable cause. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this, because where I practice, we do almost everything through grand jury. Yeah. So, we do indictments. We almost never have probable cause hearings.
Exactly.
And so I was a little surprised that a probable cause hearing wasn't asked for and scheduled sooner in this case, since the arrest was made off of an affidavit. I just thought that would, as a matter of course, would happen quickly. I
felt the exact same way. I was shocked. And like when the story first dropped that they had made the arrest back on, like, when they took him into custody on the 26th, and then they ended up kind of arraigning him on the DL on the 28th, and then they had the presser on Halloween where they announced what happened, because they had done that. It was really on the down low. I had read the judge had scheduled a preliminary hearing. That's what I'm saying. Like, reporters just don't understand what they're hearing. Sometimes even seasoned crime beat guys like screw it up. And when I say guys, I mean men and women. I use that generically just so everybody knows out there. I quickly found out that they had not, that was just it was a pretrial conference where they're just going to come in and give, where they're at in discovery and filing the motion. So I felt the same way, man. I was stunned, and it still didn't get scheduled today.
The bond hearing is not until February.
Yeah. Well, and that's on the bond. So that's what I want. Like, to me, that was the most fascinating part of it, because in Indiana for 150 years, they have, and Brett, you probably, in terms of your practicing, like, with a bond hearing for 150 years, it had been the burden of the defendant to show why they should get bond. It's like whenever you do that bond call, I'm coming up with all the reasons why they should let my guy out. He's got a family, he's got a job, he's got a support. So in 2013,
no danger.
Yeah, all that stuff. And in 2013, a case came down in the Indiana Supreme Court where they shifted the burden to the state. So the state actually has to have the burden. And I printed it out. This case, and I won't bore you guys with reading the case, but if anybody does care about it, it's 5E State. And basically what it says is, additionally, the evidence cannot simply be statements by the prosecutor as to what the proof will or might be at trial. The prosecutor's assertion about evidence that he feels may be able to introduce are not proof, because what they require is proof that there's enough there for either a conviction. It's a pretty high burden.
Yeah, it really is. You can proffer the witness or the evidence.
It is. And so what's interesting is the interplay is it almost puts the state in position moving towards that bond hearing, that they have to move to unseal it. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to meet their burden.
Right.
Like that blew my mind, kind of. Like, I don't know that the defense thought of it, because it's not like that in Illinois. Like, that is not how it is. Like, it's done like where we just go in and we have to, because when you read the motion by the defendants when they filed it last night, it was a 2-pager, real short, and it's.
Yeah, I read it. I mean, it's like 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, it's bare bones, man. And all he did was cite the law in terms of exactly what it is, and so.
I wonder if that had the effect of making bond hearings, because where I'm from, you get a bond hearing almost immediately. But because the prosecution, I mean, the burden's pretty low. You just proffer the evidence, and then usually they don't get bond. But maybe because they do that in Indiana, that's why It sort of has the unintended consequence of now the prosecution has 3 months to prepare for a bond hearing, which is
a bond hearing.
Crazy. And maybe the bond hearing just sort of ends up serving the purposes, both a bond hearing and a probable cause hearing.
Exactly. So, because I was like, yeah, for us, it's the same. Like typically it's the PD handling the bond call because it's right after, like as soon as the guy can get, like if he gets arrested on a Friday, can't get in front of a judge, he's going to spend the weekend in. First thing Monday morning, he's going to get in front of the judge. And typically if they haven't, they haven't had the opportunity, if they're going to hire private counsel, they haven't gotten anybody because they've been in jail or they haven't, they don't have the funds or whatever the case may be. So the PD will handle it. It's pretty rare when I get contacted by somebody who wants to hire a private counsel where they've just been arrested and I make it into the case early enough to handle the initial bond. I'm always having the conversation. I'll file a motion to modify bond depending on what was said initially. Cause it's like you said, it's like, they're up there and they throw out the facts immediately and in terms of what the grounds for the arrest were. And at that point, the PD's like, okay, well, tell me something about your family, your background. Do you do anything civically? Do you go to church? All the things you try to make the person sound like they're a decent human being. So, man, it was, so that was surprising in terms of how they handled that. And like, I'm really curious how it's going to go moving forward because of the way that they have it situated where that burden is on the state. Like, I don't know how they're going to be able to do anything without unsealing it. And that's why I think she kicked it so long. She kicked the bond hearing so long because I think she wants to sit on it for a while. I really do.
And people, as I've said, with my prosecutor hat on, it'd be great if you could do everything in secret and not have to share anything with the public and never have the public involved and not have to worry about reporters, particularly in a case like this. I mean, I've never been in a case like this. I mean, where there's so much attention. Right. But my sort of American citizen hat, it bothers me that stuff is done in secret. I have a big belief that one of the protections we have is we prosecute people in public. Right. And it's not just voyeurism or wanting to know all the salacious details. It's ensuring that this person who is innocent until they're proven guilty is being treated fairly, that there actually is probable cause for the arrest, that the judge is acting fairly, that the public can hold the judge to account if they're not acting fairly. And so to me,
gee, Brett, you almost sound like a defense attorney there.
Hey, I'm just a fair guy, right? I'm just a fair guy. What can I say?
And so am I. In like, I think from the defense attorney's perspective, frankly, I mean, you and I are both in this community, and I know that there's been like a kind of a push that they feel because like somebody had said, like, and I don't know if it was the main investigator with the Indiana State Police had said that they were worried that if it got out that it might compromise the investigation. Now, subsequent to that, Doug Carter, who is the, superintendent for the Indiana State Police, like flat out came and said, he's like, I don't believe that it'll affect at least the case against Richard Allen at all if they release it. So you've got kind of like these competing forces within the same office in terms of the Indiana State Police saying kind of two different things. And as a matter of fact, McClelland, who's the prosecutor on the Allen case, he submitted a letter from the main investigator in support of keeping it sealed saying, I'm concerned, like we're worried about, the public. And it is a high profile case. It's different, because like when I handled that Garcia case in Omaha, it was very similar to this. It was just a brutal case. 11-year-old boy had been murdered and 3 other victims who were just upstanding, wonderful people that obviously didn't deserve to die. So, there was a massive media crush in that case. And I mean, they really tried my guy in the press for 3 years. They honestly did, the Omaha World Herald. So like, even because I'm with you, I want transparency. That's what the Constitution calls for. I mean, all trials are public. I mean, it's in stone, and you create that slippery slope where, okay, well, it's good. It's a high profile case. So now we have to worry about, should we release the information? Well, I think you have to. I think they're going to be hard pressed to keep it under wraps for much longer, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. And people online are like, well, are they going to try and have the whole trial in secret? No, they're not. No. That's impossible. They're keeping this stuff quiet as long as possible. They're playing out this string as long as possible. Eventually, yes, it's all going to come out. What's interesting is at the same time, a lot of this is getting ready to come out. Then you have the prosecution filing for a gag order.
Right.
And That it's interesting to me. I'm interested in your take on this because, as you noted in one of your cases, the prosecution tried that person in the press, and that is something
Yes.
you can do, and sort of, basically setting up where every juror who comes in there thinks the guy's guilty,
Right.
and it's sort of a prove he's innocent place,
Right.
which is not what you're supposed to do, but nevertheless, it happens.
It
And
happens.
so it's interesting that the prosecution is asking for a gag order, which would keep everyone from talking about it.
Right.
And doesn't mean the guy wouldn't be tried in the press, but it would be harder for the prosecution to direct that trial.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was unusual, and like in the Garcia case in Omaha, like it came up and like he put a gag order, but like the judge, because we had two judges. We had the first judge who he was over his skis a little bit. Like he had just not handled a case like that. And like I think he had come from like a civil background as an attorney. And like he was not ready, but we had him for 2 years. He had ruled on all my substantive motions were massive. My change of venue motion, which was huge. Like we hired a polling company to poll the citizens of Douglas County to see where they were after 2 years of reading about my guy being the killer. And I know for a fact that and they're the district attorney out there, they obviously had a leak, because there was one guy that was the main crime beat reporter. And I mean, this guy just had information that there's no way you can get unless you're getting it from the cops and or, the county attorney's office. So
Right.
like we knew it. We knew it. And like Allison, my wife, who tried it with me along with my father, and it was such a hard fought case, and it was a death penalty case. So I'm going hard. Like I am going to make the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they have the right guy before they kill him. That is my job. So, and I went with it just that hard. And I told them, like in the beginning, the press, I said, look, I don't have to be friends with these judges and these prosecutors or, anybody else in the criminal justice system in Omaha, Nebraska. So I'm coming in with a scorched earth attitude because I have a job to do, because like you have that thing where, like if I'm practicing in my county, I want to stay in good stead with my judges, you know what
Right.
I mean? Because like I have to worry about all the rest of my clients down the road over the years. And I don't want them, abhorring me walking into their courtroom because like I'm over the top, so we fought that case really hard. And so they kind of had a gag order, but it wasn't specific. And in retrospect, I wish that they would have, because they ended up like they have this rule. It's called the safe harbor rule, where, as prosecutors they'll leak information to the press because they want it to get out there. They do want to create that advantage for themselves in the public, and it's that situation where the fair harbor rule says that defense attorneys can try to counteract it to a certain extent, but like where that balance is really tough. And they ended up removing Allison from the case like 2 weeks before trial, 3 years in, and she was like our DNA expert. She's the one who had the best grasp on it. It was like a devastating move. We did like an interlocutory appeal, which if you guys don't know what that is out there, it's like when you appeal during the middle of the case, which is very rare. It got booted as being it wasn't timely, but it was, like in retrospect, I wish Allison wouldn't have had the ability to be able to do that, because she didn't get to try that case with me, and I lost my trial partner, so it was, and we felt that was a Sixth Amendment issue, big time, moving forward with the appellate process. And, we definitely got hometowned, we were Chicago lawyers in Omaha. They hated us, but I think at the end of the day, they realized that we did the job. I went there and I tried that case. So yeah, like the first thing that guy says is, I was like, man, he's really like, and I'm talking about today, bringing it back to Delphi.
Right.
As soon as that Baldwin was out there talking, I'm like, man, he's really towing the line, like in terms of what he's saying,
Yeah.
like he was dangerously close. Like if that was me in
really
Omaha
close.
saying what he had said today, I
Yeah.
would have been admonished by the judge. I have no doubt about it, So it's like, it did surprise me, but I think at the end of the day, and it did surprise me that it was the prosecutor coming with it, because it's like you said, that's not typically how it goes, man. I was shocked by that, because it's like typically it's the defense attorney that wants everybody to keep quiet and keep the prosecutors and law enforcement on a short leash.
And just following up on that, so it looks like the defense, their strategy right now is to try and fight a battle that seems like it might have already been lost, but not necessarily. I mean, obviously, most people think as soon as this guy was arrested, he's guilty. The prosecution must have overwhelming evidence, et cetera, et cetera. And the defense comes out today and says something which didn't really surprise me, but I don't know what it is about you guys, but it's like the public just believes you when you say things. So he comes out and says, well, there's no evidence here. There's absolutely no evidence. This is a weak case, and we're gonna challenge this, and he's gonna get bail and all this other stuff. And I thought that was an interesting approach to try and take that fight to the public sphere and almost create doubt in the mind of the listening public.
Yeah. It was
way
like
before you even have a trial.
Yeah, it was like the opposite of what typically happens. It's like typically if I've got a high publicity case, I'll always come in, initially saying that my client's innocent, but that's, before I've looked at the evidence. So I'm assuming that people that are interested in following what we do for a living or what we did for a living have an understanding that there's some gamesmanship in the beginning of it. I haven't dove into the evidence. I haven't gotten discovery. The first time that I'm speaking, I haven't gotten anything. I'm looking at that probable cause affidavit and I'm seeing what they're laying out in terms of what they say they have. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to be able to challenge that evidence. So yeah, man, that's what I mean. Like he came out firing, like he laid down the gauntlet, and to be honest, we don't know. I mean, he could be right. Because there is this train of thought out there that this arrest was done as just to get an arrest. And then, like I've heard people saying it, like more than a few, like that, they're challenging whether or not this is a legitimate arrest because they're refusing to release that information, which goes back to what you were saying initially. We need that transparency so that we know, that like if they say, look, we've got DNA, I mean, if they say, look, this is what we have an eyewitness, whatever the case may be, because I know that the judge received a redacted copy of, the probable cause affidavit today where they had redacted. It sounds like they just redacted the witness name. So it sounds like there's some witnesses out there. I think we're all anxious. I want justice for the girls. I really do, and I don't know if this is the right approach. I don't,
And I've been riding the fence on this case from the very beginning, because on the one hand, we've been critical really from the very beginning of how this case has been handled vis-a-vis releasing information to the public.
Right.
We thought and always thought that getting more information out there was better. You don't have to release everything. I understand hold back evidence better than most. I get that, but it just felt like they were holding too much back.
Yeah.
And it seems as though that hasn't changed, and they continue to do that. And to me, once you make the arrest, you should be ready to go to the public and to the courts and everybody else with what you've got. And if you're not ready to do that, then I'm kind of questioning why you made the arrest. And I understand there could have been exigent circumstances we don't know about. That's also a possibility, and I get that.
Right.
And of course, the conspiracy theories start to run wild too. You have the prosecutor saying there may be other people involved. What does that mean? Are we talking about a pedophile ring here? Are we talking about the Anthony Schatz account? Are we talking about someone actually involved in the murders?
Right.
And I get you don't want to tip that person off if you're on the verge of arresting that person.
Right.
And people were like, well, if it doesn't mention another person, well, there could be information in the affidavit that when you read it doesn't mean anything to you. But when the person they're looking at reads it, they're like, oh, shoot, they know. Right. And so I assume that's what they're talking about.
But, I mean, they have to be. Yeah. Because I was coming back and like somebody from Law and Crime hit me up and they're like, they want to do a sidebar with me, and she asked me, specifically about Anthony Schatz or, Keegan. And she's like, well, like, what's your gut on that? And I'm like, well, I mean, based on what I've seen of him, he seems to be kind of a computer troll type of dude, like kind of weirdo perv guy, not a guy who's out there actively doing things. And that's based on my 20 years of handling some of the most horrific stuff you can ever handle in terms of child sex cases. They're the most abhorrent. Like as a personal, they're personally, I have 4 kids. Mm-hmm. So it's like, they're the hardest thing for me to handle. They
blow people's minds.
Yeah,
if the general public saw one of those cases, it would just
blow their minds. Yeah, when Alice and I started the practice, 20 years ago, she's like, I'm never handling one of those cases ever, and then as you progress through it, it's like, you can only pick your clients so much,
And there are so many of them.
There's so many, it's such a prevalent, especially, when the online thing became a thing, when it used to be just, sicko perverts that were molesting kids, it didn't seem like the volume was as massive as it is now. But like, with the advent of the internet, which is one of the many things that I hate about the internet. There's things that I love, but there's a lot that I hate about it.
Yeah, I always tell people, no matter how, it's one of those things. A lot of times, crime is overblown. Like, people think there's a lot more violent crime than there is. People think that they're much more likely to be a victim of crime than they are.
Right.
That stuff, the child pornography stuff, the sexual abuse stuff, is the one area of crime where, however bad you think it is so much worse.
Worse, man. It is. So. It's so prevalent, and it's like, there was like out here, they have what they call child advocacy centers, where basically, when kids make an outcry, it's not the cops that are interviewing these kids, they'll bring them to like they call them CACs out here. And you've got a licensed investigator there that's, trained to build rapport with these young children, so it's like, as we educate our children earlier and earlier in school as to, because back when I was growing up, and it was like, literally don't take strangers from candy. And that was the extent of it. I didn't learn anything about that in school. Right. We've shifted out of necessity to, unfortunately, where our kids have to be taught things that we'd all love as parents to not have to expose our children to at an early age like that, and like destroy the innocence of youth. But unfortunately, the reality of it is, I started teaching my kids. I'm like, if anybody ever tells you you have to keep a secret, immediately, you come to me forthwith. You do not wait for one second. Anybody that tells you have to keep it secret from your parents or anybody, immediately, even if they haven't done anything, if they're telling you, if those words come out of their mouth, they're up to no good, so like I taught that to my children immediately, man, because it's unfortunately the world we live in, man, and it's, yeah. So I like, as far as like that Anthony Schatz guy, to me, the only thing it could be is like a sex ring, like where he somehow got the girls out on that bridge that day, by, saying that he was going to meet them. And, and then it was some kind of planned thing, man. I just can't see him physically being there. I mean, and it's like the other thing that you were saying, like, we don't even know how the girls were like, what weapon was used,
Right.
Like, I've read that the crime scene was beyond gruesome from whatever the murder sheet put out there. But it's like, we don't know, like, to me, because, Libby was a stout young girl, man. And she was smart. She's like, I can't see her getting pushed around by some schmuck without her putting up a fight. And when you've got two kids that are both, 13, 14-year-old that have the ability to run, it makes me think that more likely than not, there was a gun involved, that they were given directions, like I just can't see how one person can get two girls physically where they've got domain over them, and then getting them down there to do the horrible things that happened. It reminds me of what went on with the West Memphis 3 thing. It's like, it always kind of befuddled me that it was one dude could have done that, because you had 3 boys. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, how are you controlling the other 2 while you're doing your dirty deeds with the one? It's just like, when you think about it logically, and you and I have both done this. I mean, like, when I dive into these cases, I have to think about how it could have happened. Like, logically, could it actually have happened the way that they're saying that it happened? And when there's no ligature marks, so that nobody was tied up. Like, if the physical evidence just isn't showing you what you need to see in order for that narrative to fit, I'm torn whether or not that I want them to release it. But I mean, obviously, I'm dying to know what they have, just out of like pure interest. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, I don't know. I'm just fascinated by the fact the bail hearings in February.
Oh, dude, it's crazy. It's crazy.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I thought maybe I just didn't know how things were done in Indiana and the Midwest, right? But I mean, that's a long time for a bail hearing.
It's
A
insanely
bail
long.
hearing is you're demanding immediate release, basically. I feel like he could almost file a habeas corpus motion and be like, I'm being held. I've asked for a bail hearing and they're telling me I'll get one in 3 months.
Dude,
3 months?
Dude, it's crazy. Theoretically, he could have gone in there and they could have done a speedy demand. He's in custody. They would have had to go to trial
Before the bail hearing.
before the bail hearing, man. It's crazy. Because
Right.
and you like, for your listeners out there and your patrons, essentially that means that he is 100% not stepping foot out of that jail until at least February 17th, if at any point, but he doesn't even have an opportunity to do it until that date. And we're talking 3 months. It's unheard of, really. Like it's crazy.
And I
You're
know
right.
everybody's but he killed 2 people. He deserves it. I get
Yeah.
that. But step back from a moment for that and imagine you were arrested for something you didn't do. Just hold on to that for a second.
Right.
And you at least want to get bail so you can, while you wait your day in court, where you, as a person who's presumed innocent until you're proven guilty, get to make that argument. And all you're asking is for a judge to have to evaluate whether or not the state has enough evidence to hold you during the couple years that it's probably going to take to try this case, whether or not you're a flight risk or a danger. That's all you're asking for.
Right.
Is to have your day in court, to have a judge say, sorry, dude, you're being accused of killing 2 people. They got some pretty good evidence. You're staying in jail. Good luck at trial. That's all you're asking for. And they're like, okay, we'll let you do that in 3 months.
Right.
It's just,
because
it blows my mind.
where does that bring your brain, though? Like, in terms of like what they have, you know what I'm saying? Because if I'm the prosecutor and I know I've got a strong case, I've got no problem saying, dude, let's just have the bail hearing. I'm ready right now. Because I was not getting the impression that it was the defense that was going in there. They filed. I don't know that they asked for a date on it. You know what I mean? I did not get that impression that it was like, it's typically like when you file a motion, the state obviously has the opportunity to respond to that in writing. And the judge will ask, do you want to respond to that in writing? Or are you ready to go on this? If I'm the state and I've got some rock solid evidence and I know that there's no way that they're letting this guy out based on what we have and based on the fact that it's 2 murder charges, I'm ready to roll on that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the fact that it got pushed so far just made my mind spin. Like I was like, man, what is going on with this thing?
well, I think the one thing I'll say about that, as far as the strength of the evidence, the prosecution and law enforcement in this case have been so secretive that it could just be this is a way to continue the secrecy. Because like you said, once that hearing happens, cards are going to be on the table. There's not going to be any holding stuff back.
That's it.
So I think it could just be this is just a way for them to continue to keep the evidence under wraps. Worst case, the judge, after some period of time, I was on somebody else's show yesterday, and what I said would happen was the prosecution would give the judge a redacted affidavit to review, and it would take the judge forever to do it, and that would keep the affidavit secret for a little bit longer.
Right.
At some point, that'll be released. Probably not. Who knows? Might not be released till next year. Right. I mean, the judge, it's just the judge's timeline. She could release it tomorrow. She could release it in January.
Exactly. She gave no indication of any kind of date certain at all, and it
really puts the press, who's leading the charge on this, in a rough place because it's under submission to the judge. So what do you do if you're the press, right? Like you have to wait some reasonable period of time before you try and seek some sort of appeal or whatever, or you file a motion, a status motion. I mean, the thing, if you want to, it's so easy to slow down the process. I mean, the legal process, the wheels of justice grind slow. I mean, you can take forever to do anything.
I say it all the time on my pod, man. It's so true, though. It's so true.
But I'll tell you what normally doesn't grind slow is the bail hearing.
Exactly. That's usually immediate. That's the one area that grinds very quickly. Yeah, man. It was because when I first did kind of like an update, like on our side show, and we call it the docket. It's a funny story. I was telling my producer, Darren, I'm like, you know what? Because we do the serialized thing. I'm like, there's so much going on. Like it's driving me nuts that I can't talk about any of these cases because I'm doing serialized cases. And, so I wanted to sound off on some of these things. And then when this story broke, I was like, man, I really want to. Like, that was the impetus of me starting the whole docket thing. Like, I want to talk about this case, and yeah, it's just procedurally, it's a really weird case, man. It really is. It's like they're gonna have time restraints they're gonna be running up against in terms of indicting him. I don't know if they're going to a grand jury or they're having to pull. Like, I have no idea what they're going to do there.
That's the thing I don't understand.
Know.
And I dug around in Indiana statutes trying to find something that gave some sort of time limit about when you have to have the preliminary hearing.
Me too.
And it just doesn't seem like there's anything.
And I called my buddy who's like a pretty prominent criminal defense guy in Indy, and I'm like, yo, dude, I'm like, what is going on over there? What is happening? I'm like, why did they seal these documents? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I've been practicing here for 20 plus years and they've never done this in a case. So it's completely out of the ordinary. Like, there is nothing that is going on that is normal to what typically goes on in Indiana courts. So it's like a whole different thing. And I have to think that, they're allowing just the publicity of the case and how much, interest there is in it, that they're allowing that to steer the ship. And I don't know if that's the right way to go, but I guess we'll find out, man. But from the legal side of it, I'm assuming that his defense attorneys are aware of what we're not aware of in terms of a drop dead date by when they have to have him indicted, before they have an issue, so I don't know, man.
It's just, I practice in the federal system. Most people know that. In the federal system, everything's so much clearer. If you arrest somebody in a complaint on a probable cause, you got 30 days.
Yep.
You got 30 days to indict them. And that's just the rule, right? And when you do the bond hearing, it's like you arrest them, they show up, they have their initial appearance. You seek to detain them. They ask not to be detained. The judge asks if you need extra time as the government. You say yes. You get 3 days.
Yes.
You get 3 extra days. And then you have the hearing.
Exactly.
And at the hearing, you got to put on enough evidence to show that they need to be detained for the
federal court, man, is a whole different.
It's a whole different. Yeah. I did some stuff in state court before this, but federal court's so much better.
So much better. And like, you're just dealing with brighter people. Like at every level, the U.S. attorneys are smarter, the judges are smarter. You're just dealing with, and it's run so well and it's so efficient. There is no, like, I was telling people on my update about, the Delphi case. I'm like, look, I don't want everyone getting upset because there is no way that trial is going on May 20th.
No way.
There is a 0% chance. I'm like, in a state court with a case like this thing is going to be 2.5, 3 years before
if it goes in 2023, I will be stunned.
I will be
stunned. This is a winter 2023 trial. I'll be stunned. I'm thinking 2024.
I will buy you a steak dinner if it goes in 2023. There is no way. There's no way. Just no way.
They're not having the bond hearing until February.
Exactly.
They're not going to turn around the next month and have a trial.
Exactly. What an amazing point. That is, they're not even having the bond hearing. They're not going to have the trial a month later. Yeah, it's crazy, man. It is absolutely crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I'm all in. I'm going to keep driving down there. I'm going to get down there earlier. So I definitely want to get in for the bond hearing.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like they're going to do like a full blown witnesses, like very, you're not typical in terms of what they're planning on doing is what it sounds like. So I don't know. It's weird.
I want to get up there some for it too. I'd like to see some of it.
You should, man. It's like, for me, it's not a bad drive. It's like, it was like 2.5 hours. So I got up at like 5 but I lose an hour because it's Eastern Standard Time. So, and I always forget to factor that in. I realized it when I was like halfway, like for as many times I've driven over there, I always forget that I'm going to lose that hour. So then I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to get there at 8:45. There's no way I'm getting in if they are letting people in, which held true. But, it didn't really. So once I knew that you couldn't operate a phone in there, it really didn't make any difference other than, me trying to hunt down somebody that I felt like had a grasp of what was actually going on in there. Like I was trying to find like some like court rats, like guys that are just, like people that are like into that and like know what the language means and procedurally what was happening, because like just reporters screw it up all the time. So I wasn't trying to ask them,
And I've heard that in Indiana, they don't televise trials. Is that right? Do you know?
I don't know, man. I honestly don't know. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I think that every trial should be televised. Like, and you give people, I mean, with the technology we have now, it doesn't have to be some high profile case. Cause you and I both know, I mean, when you're stuck in the middle of the case, I mean, they're all interesting. It's the human condition. Right. I mean, it just is. It's like every case.
It's the ultimate reality television show.
It really is, man. You can't get any more real than that. It's like, it wasn't my dad, but it was one of his friends. He's like, there's no small cases. There's just small lawyers. I was like, yeah. I think there's some truth to that. He had two like things that stuck with me. He's like, never trust a lawyer with dirty shoes. And there's no small cases. There's only small lawyers. So like those two things have stuck with me for 20 years. I thought that it was pretty apt advice because I always found myself looking at lawyers' shoes and my own. I'm like, ooh, mine are looking pretty ragged.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the only thing we learned today is that this case continues to be very, very strange.
Yeah.
It's a very unusual.
I mean, what's your gut on this thing? I mean, like, do you, let me ask you, did you hear this story that dropped? And like, I always take everything with a grain of salt that I see, online through report. But so apparently Richard Allen back on the 13th, back in 2017, February 13th, when the girls went missing, had gone to a conservation officer and made an admission that he was in the area. I don't know if he said I was on the bridge, but he said he was in the area. And then this thing got buried. Like no one saw it. So Indiana State Police was getting really irritated with the local sheriffs. And they're like, they sent a crew out there like, I want you to go dig through the files again. And then this is like, I'm talking like 2 weeks ago, or like less than. They end up digging up this report that this guy had gone, Richard Allen had gone to a conservation, made this admission that he was there, didn't see the girls, quote unquote, and then, but, to have that existing and to have that not be, okay, I don't know if the guy's been on the radar. It's so weird because like you started hearing rumors that there was going to be arrest. You remember? Like, right. Like I'd say like the beginning of the summer, there's going to be an arrest today. And then that didn't happen. So I'm like, what is going on with this, man? It's like, there's something weird about it. Like, and I cannot put my finger on it. Like the whole way they're handling it, like, cause it's like you say, I get there is a rationale by not giving certain information, because if you have a situation where you can get somebody in custody and you're questioning them, and you want them to be able to say something, as a police officer who's conducting the investigation that only the killer would know. So that's, one of the main reasons you want to keep things from the public. So it's not public knowledge, because if you have the opportunity, the guy doesn't lawyer up and they're able to interrogate him and they start talking, and the guy and a crafty investigator is going to know the way to ask it to where they're kind of trapping him into giving them the answer that they're looking for, where it's only something the killer would know. That's one of the primary reasons why a lot of times law enforcement will hold stuff back, and this is just like they're holding everything back. Right. It's like, I mean, if you look at it, like, really, what do we know? We haven't even seen the whole, like, I think that the video's longer.
I think it absolutely is longer. There's no question it's longer.
I mean, like 43 seconds. Like, I don't know, man. It's crazy. I guess we'll see how it plays out. Yeah, you should take a field trip. You should
I should take a field trip.
Totally.
I'll say this. I think people want this case to stick, obviously.
Yes.
And because they want it to stick, they find themselves being very concerned. They go to the worst case scenarios with this whole arrest, and that, they really didn't have anything, but they arrested him because they were hoping he would just confess, and he didn't confess, and now they're totally screwed.
Right.
I don't think that's what happened.
Me either.
Now, I could imagine a situation in which what you said is true, that they wanted to arrest him and they hoped that he would flip on somebody else, and he has not.
Right.
And because he has not, the investigation is sort of ongoing because they just don't believe it's him alone. They think there was somebody else involved. Maybe they've always thought there were two people involved.
Right.
That has always been a rumor in this case, is that the police thought there were two people involved in this. I
mean, when you think about the logistics, I mean, it kind of common sense kind of lends itself to that theory.
Well, you brought up West Memphis 3. I mean, that's why I've never thought. It's like Could it have been one person? I guess, but there are three
Yes.
victims. The whole
Like if
control
you're
issue
thinking
is
like,
hard.
oh, Terry Hobbs. So what is he
Yeah.
doing? Is he taking their shoelaces and like binding two of them up while he's doing, or did he take like a rock and knock two of them out? But like, how are you corralling three kids, like that will be running for the woods, man? I mean,
Right.
like, that has never like added up to me, which was always kind of one of the things that, made sense in terms of like, in I don't think it was the boys. But with that case, I want the evidence tested. I just don't know why they will not test the evidence, man. I don't.
Really going down a rabbit hole now. I will say
Oh,
this:
man,
it's the thing,
dude.
the one thing about Jesse Miskelly's confession that made sense was that Moore ran, and he had to go and get him. And that was the thing that always made the most sense about his confession. A lot of it doesn't make any sense, but that one thing I was always like, that feels like exactly what would happen.
It feels true, right?
Going back, and that's why I've always thought in the Delphi case that the girls ran, that it got out of control, and that was one of the reasons the murder happened, because he never intended to kill them there. Maybe he intended to take them back to this ring we're talking about, or to Keegan Klein, or whatever, right? But I don't know, we're totally down the speculation trail now.
But that's all we can do.
That's all we can do.
That's what choice they've left us.
And they complain so much about in their motion to gag everybody. They say there are all these news stories, and a lot of them aren't true, and there's all this fake information. Well, the one way you can prevent fake information is to give some real information. Yeah, I mean, and I get that this is a delicate point, but come on, there's got to be some balance. And right now, they are completely on the secrecy side. There's no balance whatsoever.
I mean, they're just not disclosing anything, I mean, it's like, and it's like you said, like at the beginning of this, man, when they make the arrest, you have to assume that they're ready to disclose. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, and look, you and I both know investigations will continue after an arrest always, I mean, that goes without saying, but like you had to have enough in order to get them in custody, to get the arrest warrant, like
in my job, we don't do a search warrant unless we're ready, because once you do the search warrant, that's the end of the secret investigation. I mean, obviously, police show up at your house and knock on the door, there's an investigation of you. Yeah,
they're on to you.
And so this notion that somehow they're going to maintain the secrecy of this investigation at this point is just absurd.
It's crazy. Like it's impossible, and there's just too much interest in it. It's not like some under the radar case, and there's like a lot of stuff going on, man. I mean, there's the Delphi thing, there's the tragedy that went on in Idaho, which is another crazy case, man. I'm trying to dig in that, and it's like it seems like the cops are jumping to conclusions like initially out there, like they made a big deal out of the fact that the kind of the main cop had said, well, we don't think anybody needs to worry there. I'm like, what makes you say that, man? Yeah. Like, it sounds like everybody needs to worry, Right. So like, but that's a crazy case. I'll be looking forward to your episode on that. I know you're going to have one on those. That's like, have you dug into that at all? That's
just a little bit, just enough to realize the fact that they haven't made an arrest now tells me there's something about that case, because if it was someone they knew, you got to think, because if you murder 4 people with a knife and there's blood, there's so much blood, it's like
in screaming
out of the house.
And screaming, and 2 people survived, apparently sleeping through it.
The whole thing.
I mean, you and I, like, a knife fight is absolutely brutal.
Look, knives are really deadly, but it takes a little while to die from a knife.
It does.
It's not instantaneous.
And defensive wounds tell the tale. You know what I mean?
The perpetrator in that case they'd have defensive wounds all over them, and they would have been covered in blood.
Blood, just drenched.
There's just no way.
Dude, that's my Garcia case, man. Like, I'm telling you, like, this guy, both sets of homicides, the first one was all knives, and I'm talking the jugular was severed, the carotid was severed. I mean, we're talking like just massive amounts of blood going everywhere. And the same with, in the second set where Mary Brumbeck fought absolutely like to the core of her being to try to fight this guy off. I mean, she had like 30 defensive wounds on her hands and arms, which means she's blocking, you know. I mean, think about that. Like, think about like a knife fight and like, you know, so yeah,
Right.
I like it's crazy like that. There's something so bizarre going on because it was late. You know, they'd all been out.
Very late.
It sounded like they'd all been partying. You know, they hit a food truck late. They all get back like around 1:30, you know, 1:45 in the morning, and something goes out. Like the one girl's texting her boyfriend. He's not answering because he's sleeping.
And she was texting and calling him apparently until right before this happened.
Yeah.
You know, people are like, well, they were all asleep. Well, she was on the phone like 10 minutes before this happened.
Exactly. Like from what I saw, it was like until like 2:26 a.m. Like she like for almost a half an hour, she was hitting her boyfriend up, texting and calling, you know, because I guess her sister came and made a statement. She said, look, that's what my sister does. If she's trying to get a hold of you, she's you know, a habitual caller. She'll call over and over and over until you pick up. So yeah, that's it. And then the other case, I don't know, have you heard about this thing in Iowa with the Lucy Studi, who is claiming that her father
was a serial killer?
Yeah, 50, but she's saying 50 to 70 people are buried
sounds a little high.
around that land. I mean, she's talking like 3 decades, and she's been trying to tell people for 45 years. It's not like she just came about, like she said that she's been trying to tell people since 2nd grade. Like I hunted her down because it was close. So I'm like, I reached out to her because Newsweek had broken the story. And, you know, I was like, well, I would really like to cover this case if I can, because if it's true, because you've got a sister that lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, that's saying my sister is full of it. There is absolutely no truth to anything that she's saying. And I start thinking, I'm like, why would somebody, and this Lucy Studi has come out unequivocally saying, I am not looking for any money. She's like, I am not trying to ring the bell. I'm not trying to get a movie deal. I want these victims. I want them to have their names back, and I want their families to know, you know, I mean, she like, there is not, and I've spoken with her for hours, and she does not strike me as somebody who is at all mentally ill.
I was about to ask that.
She you know, and I've been dealing with folks that are dealing with mental illness for a long time. If I'm being frank, that my biggest beef with prosecutors is just always trying to get them to acknowledge that like mental health and mental illness is a real thing. And it's typically the impetus for a lot of the crimes that are committed. You know, I mean, I'm like, I'll have a guy who's clearly out of it, and I'm like, you're seeing the same human being that I'm seeing, right? You know, and it depends on the age of the like, because if I'm dealing with,
I'll just note, I literally said that in the episode we released today.
Oh, you did? Yeah. I mean,
that a lot of crime is connected to mental illness.
It really is, man. I mean, it's like, so I'm thankful, frankly, because a lot of the courts around us here in Illinois are they now have mental health courts where they're acknowledging that it's a thing, because they need to, because it is. We know so little about the brain. I think that's what the problem is. I mean, we really do.
That's
it's
true.
like we really don't. You know, it's like they had no idea how to classify Gacy. You know, when like my dad's trying to find 5 or 6 psychiatrists because it was an insanity defense case, it was near impossible. They're like, there's nothing in the DSM that this guy like fits. Right. You know, like he doesn't fit into anything neatly, which one of the psychologists came up. That's like borderline personality came from the Gacy case. That's where he developed it, because he was like a mixture of like 4 different things.
Yeah,
you know,
the catch-all, right?
Yeah, the catch-all, exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, man, I could talk to you all night. I mean,
dude, no question, man. It's been awesome. It's been a blast.
No, this is great. We'll have to do it again sometime.
I'd love to, man. I'd really love to. It was a blast. Yeah, and I want to encourage you to take a field trip. Like, we'll hang out, man. Like, come down. Like, come to Delphi. Like, you at least got to come when it goes to trial.
Oh, I'm yeah. I mean, we're definitely gonna do that,
because it's a cute little town. Cute. I've heard.
I'd like to. I would try. I see pictures of that bridge all the time, and I think there's no way I could walk across that bridge. You know, I don't know if you've been to the bridge or not.
Dude, like, it's so funny you said that. Like, my plan was, because I've driven, like, I've got friends that live in Indy, so I've driven by Delphi a million times. And, you know, when I kind of like, because I called my PI, and I'm like, because he's been into the Delphi case since the get. And I'm like, he went down actually for the presser on Halloween, and I'm like, I got kids, dude. I can take my kids trick or treating. I'm not going to the presser. I'll watch it on TV, or videotape it and send it to me, whatever. So, I called him. I'm like, I'm going down. I'm like, do you want to come with me? And he's like, I've got some services I've got to do, whatever he had to do. We had to work. So I ended up going down alone, and I'm like, he had told me that he walked the bridge the last time he went down on Halloween. And he's like, man, I just can't describe what it felt like. It just felt like nothing I'd ever, like the eeriness of it it was like palpable, like he says, you can feel it, So I was going to go until like the law and crime folks called me and they're like, hey, you have to be on a computer. You can't do it on your phone. I'm like, well, I don't have my laptop. So I guess I'm going to race 2.5 hours home to make it. So I had to truncate that part of the trip, but I was contemplating, I at least wanted to drive over there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if I would have been able to walk it either. Cause I get like on that Garcia case, man, I don't know if I was going to be able to handle it. Cause it's just like, I'm kind of, I'm a delicate soul to be honest with you. I am. I get real, I'm a very emotional person. So
yeah,
like I'm pretty empathetic. So it's like, but I kind of feel like I want to. I feel like I need to,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I might back away from it when I get down there. I don't know. But I'd love if you came and join me, man.
Well, absolutely.
Like you'd have to come down. Like we'd want to spend the night, get like a room somewhere close. Like it's like I think there were 3 rows of seating, behind like where they allocated for the family. So
right, yeah, it's going to be tough to get in. I mean, there's definitely going to be like a lottery system.
There's going to have to be like,
maybe by then they'll have decided that it's worth doing overflow rooms, so at least you can watch it.
I mean, you got like, because I went up, I knew the answer. I went up to one of the cops. I'm like, is there any chance you guys did like a closed caption, like like any kind of like overflow room? And they're like, nah. You kidding?
No, why would we do that?
Not a chance, buddy. I was like, thanks, man. I knew the answer, but yeah. But hey, man, I really, really appreciate you having me on. I really enjoyed this. I knew that we'd have fun once we started talking because it's fun. Like I love the concept of you and I being able to talk and kind of coming from both sides. And, it's like I have a lot of respect for prosecutors in general. I mean, they're both sides of the aisle are equally important, and we need good ones on both sides out there to make sure that this thing that we try to call justice so that it works to the best of its ability. I mean, I haven't found a system that's better than ours anywhere else in the world. As flawed as it is, but it's the best that there is out there. So yeah, man, I'm grateful you had me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You've been awesome. We're going to do this again in the future. Maybe next time we can have Alice on as well. You love Alice. Awesome. Everybody loves Alice. But I do want to thank Bob for hanging out with us. If you guys haven't listened to Defense Diaries, you need to listen to Defense Diaries, and we will definitely hook up with Bob later. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Prosecutors Legal Briefs. We'll be back next week. Next week, we're actually going to be talking about defense attorneys. So Bob, I promise it's not all bad. So
thank you. That's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear. Thanks, man. I appreciate you, Brett. And thanks for all you patrons out there that hung out with us. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everybody who joined for this live recording. And we will see you next week. Until then, I am Brett, and this has been the Prosecutors Legal Briefs. See, Alice usually starts this, so I got to figure out how to do it. Okay.
You're doing the intro.
I know.
It's exciting.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Prosecutors Legal Briefs. I know
Wow, 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 wow. That was me doing the drums. Are there drums in the song? I don't think there are drums.
There are drums. There's absolutely
drums.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, maybe there is.
Dong.
Oh, there are. Yeah, I guess so. Or is that bass?
Well, there's
That's
bass
bass
following
track.
along with the drums too.
I'm Alice,
And I'm Brett.
and this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to this live Zoom discussion of the Delphi case and the release of the probable cause affidavit. And Alice is here. She's come back from Alaska. So hello, Alice.
Hey, guys.
But it's not just Alice. We're also joined by the awesome team from the Murder Sheet who are going to talk to us as well and give us their thoughts. And I'm just we are so honored. They were talking about how they were honored to join us. I mean, that's ridiculous. We are honored to have you guys taking your time. And I'll just say, for anybody who doesn't know you, go ahead and introduce yourselves. I can't imagine there are that many people who don't, but nevertheless.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. I'm Anya Kane. I'm a journalist, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the Murder Sheet podcast.
I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney, and I'm the other co-host of the Murder Sheet podcast. And it is an honor to be here. I remember when you guys first started your podcast, I discovered it through Lance and Tim, and I got to know pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Lance and Tim, our podfathers, as well.
Our podfathers.
Yeah, those guys are awesome. And Kevin's not only a lawyer, he's a lawyer in Indiana.
Yes.
There you go.
Which is pretty valuable. Well, okay, so the big news, they released the probable cause affidavit. Were you guys, it was an affidavit, right? Were y'all surprised by anything that was or was not in there?
Well, we were definitely caught off guard by it dropping. We were literally in the middle of another episode we were doing about change of venue, which of course is what the defense requested earlier today. And then Kevin suddenly, yelled, "Oh my goodness, it just came out." So we dropped everything, read it very quickly, and then read it again more slowly. I think we're still in shock that it's finally out. There was so much from the prosecution in this case, basically saying, like, we don't want to unseal it. It would be problematic. And so basically the judge in this basically said, I don't think it's problematic. Here you go.
And just on that point, did anybody read anything in it that you were like, well, that's why they sealed it? Is that right there?
The opposite. We were really trying to be open-minded to that. It's possible that we're missing something, but I don't understand why this wasn't redacted for witness names and released immediately, because and they were alluding, prosecution was alluding to, more than one person may be involved, which is possible, but certainly not spelled out in this affidavit. It's not. No one else is mentioned. It's definitely.
I have to tell you, right after the arrest happened, we heard from a source who said, well, basically, other than the bullet, there's not a heck of a strong case there. And when I read the probable cause affidavit today, I thought, well, actually, that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to make 2 points real fast for everybody on here. The first thing is probable cause affidavit does not necessarily include everything that they have.
Exactly.
A lot of times in our affidavits, we will actually say, this does not include everything that is known to the officer. It's only enough to meet probable cause. This affidavit doesn't say that, but nevertheless, that was their point, was to meet probable cause. That's the first thing. The second thing, it would not include anything that they have discovered since the arrest. So I'll throw out something that's a possibility there. And I'd be interested to know what you guys think, because we speculate, but a lot of times you guys actually know. DNA. People talk about DNA. Is there DNA? There's no DNA mentioned in the probable cause affidavit. What does that mean? Does that mean they don't have DNA? Well, it could be. This guy, he has no record. Therefore, his DNA would not be in CODIS. In Indiana, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're arrested for a felony, you're required to submit DNA. So it's possible that they have DNA from the killer, that after he was arrested, he was required to submit DNA, and they're now running that test to compare the two. That's a possibility. That would not be in the probable cause affidavit.
Yes, that's a very good point. And we definitely don't think this is all they have, or all they have, on Alan or the crime as a whole, right? And it's certainly possible that there's, they're kind of shoring up certain things right now. Some people have wondered, oh, was this 5-year long sting operation on this one guy, and finally they were able to kind of go for it. And our impression is no, that basically he came up, he was talked to in 2017, as the affidavit means clear. And then something happened where they circled back to him in 2022. The story we heard was that the investigators themselves, or someone associated with the investigation, was going through things and sort of, hey, we need to follow up on this. And then that basically resulted in everything we've seen. We've heard rumors about people tipping this guy, or, saying, oh, it was him, but that's
not the case.
That's not the case here. It was just a matter of checking your work.
And, that's a really great point that he was talked to in 2017. Obviously, they probably haven't summarized everything they had from his interview back in 2017, but notice they did include, which they didn't have to in the affidavit, the follow-up point from his interview in 2017, which actually had nothing to do with Bridge Guy. The follow-up, for those of you who haven't read it, it's a very short kind of summary narrative. And then the follow-up that the police put in the report after speaking with Richard Allen was simply, who were the 3 women he said he encountered, as opposed to anything about him, what car he drove, what was he doing there, what time he left, where did he park, why did he park there, what did he say to the women. That tells me alone, back in 2017, they weren't looking at him. They were interested in finding more witnesses to interview. That's why I think that was the follow-up question. Why they put it in the affidavit, I'm not actually sure. Maybe to show that they only knew additional information in 2022, so that the judge doesn't say, whoa, you're coming too late, this is stale. So that's my thought, but I'd love your thoughts on, what they were thinking in 2017 and that kind of one follow-up question they put in the affidavit.
I think you're pointing out something really important, Alice. And I think that's what jumped out to me too, that the follow-up question was like, all right, we better find these 3 juvenile girls. And you're like,
they saw him as a witness and not as a potential suspect. And that's,
they saw him as an expander of the web, right? Like in their mind, it was like, if we just ask one more round of people, we'll find out who Bridge Guy is. But in fact, like they weren't focusing, it seemed like, on the people they were already talking to.
Right. And that's so shocking, because I would think that any single male who's out there in kind of who might vaguely represent, the description of Bridge Guy would be really kind of torn apart, just to kind of cross them off the list. But we don't know exactly what was going on, or maybe they were going based on something else at the time, or there was something that they felt was more compelling, or that maybe made him less compelling. So we don't want to necessarily read too much into it, but it definitely raises a lot of questions about why wasn't some of this done in 2017 as opposed to now?
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of profiling 101 that when someone interjects themselves into the case, that's a person you look at. And they may just be a totally innocent person who's just trying to be helpful. But a lot of times the murderer is someone who does that.
Yeah, a lot of times that's part of the thrill for the murderer, is to inject himself into it. It gives him a sense of power to feel like he is fooling law enforcement. Or it may just be simply a case of, I want to know what they know. And the way to do that is to be a witness. And sometimes it's a case of, well, I think somebody may have seen me there, so I need to come in and offer an alternative explanation. But yeah, it's investigation 101. The people who tell you they are there, they're the ones you have to look hardest at right away.
One of our favorite true crime books is The Last Stone by Mark Bowden, and it's all about the disappearance and murder of the Lyon sisters in Maryland. And basically the whole book is like, hey, this weird guy who showed up a few days into the investigation, what's his deal? And it's this whole spiral that you get into this really horrifying story. But it does happen, even though it sounds counterintuitive.
So let's walk through the probable cause affidavit for people who either haven't read it or couldn't read it because it was difficult to read. First of all, and we talked about this a little bit, the standard for a probable cause affidavit: sufficient basis for a person of reasonable caution and prudence to believe the accused committed a crime. So very low bar, nowhere near reasonable doubt, which is another reason you don't necessarily put everything you have in that affidavit. And it's an iterative process, right? It's not like you have one shot, so you better get it right. A lot of times, and Alice and I have experienced this, often to our eternal frustration, you will go to a judge with an affidavit and you will say, I would like a warrant. I would like a search warrant. I would like an arrest warrant. And the judge is like, well, that's great. There's not a probable cause here. Go back. Here's some things, if you could nail this down, maybe, right? And you go back, talk to your investigators, and you do it. And you could imagine something like that happen where they really wanted to just give the bare amount. One thing I was interested in, there was a search and there was a search warrant. And the search warrant, and I want to talk about the bullet here in a second. The search warrant was before they had the bullet. I mean, they had a bullet, but it was before they'd connected it to anything. So I kind of wonder what the search warrant affidavit says. I would be interested to know what the probable cause for the search of the house was, because if you read the probable cause affidavit and you take out the bullet, then, I think it's pretty close about whether or not that's probable cause to have a search.
Wasn't it? I mean, of course, they don't have everything in this affidavit, but at least the way this author has written it, it said that the wife said Richard Allen still had the coat that he was wearing that day. And then the next paragraph says they got a search warrant, which in and of itself is pretty thin if that's what you're going on a search warrant for. So, and again, we're only reading this affidavit, not the search warrant affidavit, but that's at least how it's framed, and it's supposed to be framed in this affidavit. But what do you guys think? Do you think that's what kind of tipped them off? Was her comment about the jacket, or maybe multiple people's comments about the jacket?
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't even know. We were just talking about that because we realized, wait a minute, there's another probable cause affidavit floating around out there.
He may even have consented to the search. We don't know.
Yeah, it's really not clear to us, and we don't really have any sources telling us anything either way at this point. I would be curious because, as you said, it's indicative of her comment about the jacket, but I think you were also saying that would be pretty thin.
Yeah, I had the same reaction you guys did. Without the bullet, I didn't really feel there was a lot of grounds there to do a search. So I was curious about that, because we know that everything but the bullet, basically, they had in 2017. And if they could get a warrant now, why didn't they get one in 2017?
Right. And it would almost have to, for those of you, probable cause for a search warrant is probable cause that you're going to find evidence of a crime. Is what you have to show. And so maybe you could say, look, the jacket looks exactly like the jacket that he was wearing. If it is the jacket, it would have blood on it. So we want to find the jacket. But that is basically as bare bones as you could possibly get on a search warrant. Because unless, which is possible, that one of the people who saw them, they showed them a picture of him and they said, yeah, that's the guy, or that looks a lot like the guy, right? And something like that, you could put in a search warrant and do the search. I don't know why you wouldn't put that in the probable cause to arrest. Maybe you felt like the bullet's enough. You don't really have to get into exactly what your witnesses are going to say about the particular person you're looking at.
Just a reminder for everyone, because we don't have the affidavit for the search warrant here, we have to be very tailored in our search warrant applications. We can't simply have an entree in and say, okay, same coat, so therefore we get to search everything and take everything, including guns, drugs, any illegal activity we see. There are doctrines that can cover it, and you can go back and get subsequent warrants. If you go in and there's something in plain view, like you went in for, say, dog fighting, and instead you see all these guns, and the guns had nothing to do with what you were searching for, you can go back for a second search warrant. So we don't even know how many search warrants there were here, but if all they were going in on, the probable cause for the search warrant, was his jacket, and what ultimately they seized was a gun, it would be difficult to see how they could craft a search warrant application based on a jacket for a gun unless they had something else tying it, or a subsequent application. These are just things we don't know. But remember, it's not just an open door. You don't get to kind of put your toe in and then, yank open the doors to get everything someone has. And that's to protect your constitutional rights.
Yes.
And in that same bit of the affidavit, it does say that both Allen and I believe his wife acknowledged that he owned several guns and several knives. So perhaps that could also have been something that we want to go in, we want to look at these guns and knives, and we want to test them.
Yeah, it's what'll be interesting, just thinking through, one of the first things we always think about are motions to suppress. And you can argue that a search warrant is not, just like you can argue that a probable cause for an arrest is not sufficient. You can argue that an affidavit for a search warrant is not sufficient. And you can get into that whole fight. Now, it's a pretty high bar, because if a judge grants it, the idea is typically, well, that's going to be good enough. But you can attack it. So it'll be interesting to see as we go through, as we get more. I mean, we are in such early days of this case.
Yeah.
We're in such early days.
Actually, we were at the court hearing last week when they argued about whether or not to make this affidavit public. And it's interesting that you mentioned a motion to suppress, because of that hearing, one of the defense attorneys said, we know one of the reasons why this needs to be made public is it would be very difficult for us to come in here and make an argument for a motion to suppress if we're not allowed to discuss the contents of the affidavit.
Talking around it, essentially.
So it seems clear that that's something that's going to be happening in the future.
Yeah. Okay. So continuing through the probable cause affidavit on this bullet that we've been talking about a lot. So the video, we now know that in the video, one of the girls apparently mentions a gun. So presumably she sees a gun. Everybody's talked about this video and that there's more of the video, and the police have always said they weren't going to release anything the girls said. And the thought was always that's because, you know, they don't want the girls like being scared out there. Seems like in reality, there was a key piece of evidence there that they wanted to keep out.
Yeah.
There'd been a lot of speculation and rumors a gun had been involved. You got to control two people. Maybe there's a gun. Apparently there is. And then following up on that, apparently a bullet was found, an unspent round, and that's important. An unspent round was found 2 feet from one of the girls, and it had extraction markings on it. We'll get into what all that is in a second. They search his house. They find a 6 Sauer, which is a great gun if you're looking for a pistol. And when they investigate, you know, they take the gun, and basically what you do with forensics with guns, and defense attorneys will debate. I was talking to Bob Motta about this tonight, and he was debating this. But the position of, say, the prosecution is that guns are kind of like fingerprints. And when you fire a gun, it leaves an impression on the bullet that can be traced to the specific gun that's used. And so you take the gun, you shoot it into like a tub of water, you get the bullets out, you look at the markings, you match them up, and like, there it is. They're perfect match, same bullets, same gun, right? What's interesting about this is an unspent round. So presumably what happened here is at some point, for some reason, those of you who don't know how semi-automatic works, if there's a bullet in the chamber and you cock the gun, it spits the bullet out, right? So like in all the movies, people are constantly cocking their guns. Well, what would actually be happening is those bullets would just be flying all over the place, right? So apparently, for some reason, this bullet was ejected from the gun. And what the prosecution, or at least what it seems like from the probable cause affidavit, is saying is that forensically, the markings from the ejection of the bullet are apparently something that you can use to identify whether or not bullets came from the same gun. This is not something I'd ever heard of. I knew about bullet analysis, obviously, from fired bullets, but this whole extraction thing is new to me.
Yeah, we unfortunately are not gun people at all. I fired a gun 3 times in my life, and none of it, never a handgun. It was like a fowling rifle, a musket, and a M16. But we won't go into that. Kevin's never fired a gun. So when we were reading this, we were really trying to like cram on like, okay, what exactly does this mean?
I think what was most interesting about that segment of the affidavit was the person who made this alleged identification admits that this identification is subjective. And if it's subjective, you have to wonder how good of an identification it really is.
Now, they're always going to say that. I mean, that's the thing, right? So experts, and Alice and I talk about this a lot, gone are the days when experts will say it's the same bullet. They just don't do that anymore. Though we've stopped doing that. Now it's like consistent with and like all this other stuff. And there's actually been a lot of controversy about tool markings and bullet forensics and all this other stuff, because some people say it's not science, that it is purely subjective and it's worthless. I think like most things, are somewhere in the middle where really what they're going to need to do, and the most convincing evidence I've seen with bullets is when they put it on the screen and they show like, you know, bullet 1 and bullet 2, and they sort of bring the 2 bullets together and they perfectly overlap, and you can actually see where the markings are on the bullets. And now you've got, you know, 2 bullets, 1 image, but it looks like it's just 1 bullet because they've managed to line it all up. That, if that's all they have, then that expert testimony is going to be something. It's going to be really important.
And it's possible, like, we don't know enough about this gun, right? It's possible that something is askew with this gun because he's had it since 2001, that the marking really is not that it's maybe simple extraction markings wouldn't have this, but because this is his gun that he's had for so long and there's something within it that no other Sig Sauer would kind of have, you can imagine that there's more to what this expert is saying. And if you are the expert, you are hoping that you're able to point to more than just let's bring these two pictures together. And so there's going to be more to what he's saying, the way it's cocked, the way X, Y, and Z is happening. What we do know is it's the same caliber. It's for the same gun. There are lots of those types of guns. There's lots of those types of caliber bullets. But what I think is interesting, because they obviously put this within the affidavit, is his own admission voluntarily. I think they said that he voluntarily went to the police station and said, I never let anyone use my gun or shoot my gun or something like that. Which, by the way, if he used this gun at all, even if he didn't shoot the girls with it, if he had the gun with him, he must know that if he's being investigated, this gun is going to be part of the investigation. Period. And for him to not separate himself from the gun says a lot about him, which fits the profile, by the way, of what we've talked about before, that this is not some young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed wannabe serial killer. This is someone who's thought about this, salivates at the thought of this, sits there waiting to be found, and is getting like immense joy out of the hunt for himself. Right? Which actually fits the profile of the type of person who could carry out a double homicide in we haven't even gotten to this part of the affidavit, an immensely short amount of time.
And, one thing I would be interested, I mean, obviously the person had a gun. I still don't think the girls were shot, just because guns are really loud. I mean, they're really loud. And
they're not that bloody, to be totally honest.
And they're not that bloody. That's right.
He was bloody.
They're not that bloody. He was bloody. And I just can't imagine that no one would have, and maybe someone has, and I just missed it, but no one would have reported hearing gunshots if this was a shooting. I mean, where I live, I hear gunshots all the time, and it's just, it wasn't, where he wasn't that far away from people.
And based on somewhat of the thinness of the affidavit, notice that they talk about the multiple sightings of the jacket, the dark color, the hood up, the covering of his mouth. And they mention that one of the girls says gun. If any witness mentioned hearing any bang that could have been a gunshot, that would have been in the affidavit. Absolutely. And the fact that it's not, I think, Brett, you're exactly right. I don't necessarily think that the gun was used as the murder weapon, but could have been used as the intimidation weapon, which would explain the extraction, because he cocks it, he scares them, he says down the hill, and he never intends to shoot them with it. He wants to carry out his fantasy murder, which is a lot more close contact.
Right. And that gives a sense of how prepared someone would have to be if it's bringing a gun to intimidate someone, and then possibly other weapons to actually kill them and, lead them away in a kidnapping. I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but that speaks to, not necessarily something where it's, like a mugging gone wrong, or obviously, I mean, no one thinks that about Delphi at this point, but it's just pointing to like, why is he why is he going out there on the bridge toward these two girls as well, when he's in the affidavit walking past other groups of juvenile girls. So like that's what we're kind of like looking at and saying, why them?
And someone brought up a really good point in the chat about suppressors, and let's talk about that really quick, because I think you hear it in the movies. People often, you'll hear them say, oh, you couldn't have heard the gun, they could have had a suppressor on it, which just suppresses the sound. Brett and I have both shot guns with, suppressors on them. They suppress the very loud sound of a gunshot, but they do not suppress the sound of a gun.
Really
you can
absolutely,
it is still really loud. It's more like it's not going to deafen you after 10 shots. It's going to deafen you after 20 shots, but the reverberation, especially in nature, with those trees and the bridge, remember, is high up, which means there's like a valley underneath, which echoes. Anything like that, you can feel it. Even if anyone who's shot a gun knows that there's reverb. You can feel that even when you're around and you're not holding the gun, even when the suppressor is on, because that's just for the decibels. That's not for the kind of sound waves that can move the earth around you. And for all these people to be close around, essentially he's in like a microphone, where he is on the bridge. It's wherever he shoots, it's going to echo because of the location of the bridge and kind of the geography of where he is. To have not a single person be able to recall even a thud. Sometimes you hear something and you're like, maybe someone dropped a 2x4. Maybe it wasn't a gunshot. Maybe someone slammed a door. No one said anything like that. And if they did, they would have put that, I think, in the affidavit.
And a 40 caliber is a pretty big bullet. I mean, it's not, we're not talking a 22 here. right? I mean, it's a significant round. So if you're firing that, even with a suppressor, yeah, I think you'd hear it. And honestly, nobody ever has a suppressor. I'm sure I'm sure he didn't have a suppressor. I'm sure he was just out there with his gun.
And you have to register them, by the way. And so that would be part of your search warrant because he legally purchased this gun. You know, they found the records. He bought it in 2001. If he had a suppressor, even if he didn't use it, that could be part of the search warrant to look for it, because you want to look for anything that kind of helps you, you know, commit any sort of a crime.
So another thing I want to mention, which is something we complained about several times, and now I feel justified in complaining about it because they actually did have a description of the vehicle. There was that weird press conference where they said, if anybody's seen a vehicle at the CCP building, let us know. And it's like, well, do you have a description of a vehicle or not? And if you do, wouldn't it be better to give the description of the vehicle so people could be on the lookout for it? And they never did. Well, apparently they did have some descriptions of a vehicle, which were a little varied. I mean, you had one person who said it was a purple PT Cruiser, one person who said it was a smart car. I think there was another one. I can't remember exactly what they said.
Small
so they did
SUV?
have a car. Yeah, small SUV. That's right. So there was a car that different people saw at this building, which was backed up to the building, which made people think it was to avoid anyone being able to see the license plate, which seems like a pretty significant piece of information. And, you know, and this is the thing about Richard Allen. Richard Allen, in his conversations with the police, I mean, you may think this is a thin affidavit, but what's really interesting about it is he basically admits that he's bridge guy, right? Like, he basically says, all those people who said they saw a weird guy, yeah, that was totally me. You know, I was wearing exactly what bridge guy was wearing. Oh, they saw a car at the Child Protective Services building. Hey, that was my car. I was backed up there. You know,
By the way, the girls who said they saw me and I was the creepy guy, I saw them too, and I described them.
Exactly. It's like I mean, it's almost brilliant in a way where he's like basically everything you think you know about bridge guy was really just me, and I'm not bridge guy. Is kind of what he's saying.
Yeah, when we were reading this, we were kind of screaming at the point where he's basically, because, you know, you read it and you're like, okay, this car stuff is all over the place. People are seeing purple cars. People are seeing, no one can get their story straight on that. And then you have a bunch of witnesses saying, you know, relatively similar, but, you know, slightly at points varying descriptions. And they're saying, I'm not seeing his face, he's covering it up, or it was such a brief interaction that I didn't really see it. But then you have him basically negating all that because now I was there, I was on the bridge, I was, you know, walking past these girls. He's certainly
even said his face was covered. He was like, yeah, my face was probably covered. And I might have been wearing a hat. It's like,
He said,
good Lord,
also,
man.
he recognized he wasn't acknowledging anyone. He said he was looking at a stock ticker.
Right.
You know, that's how serious I look. I look like I just murdered someone. I'm looking at the stocks.
Which
Hey,
I know the
looking up-
girls were Snapchatting, but how good is the reception out there that you'd be looking at your stocks while you're walking around the
Right.
When
I
you're
was
looking at
at
fish.
I was like, yeah, oh yeah, looking at fish, looking down on the bridge at the fish going by, and the stock ticker got me. I used to be a business reporter, and I was like looking back at what was going on in the stock world that day. It was like Skechers was in trouble, and that's just such an odd detail to me. But the fact that he just basically negated all this, and you wonder what his defense attorneys make of that, because kind of opening his mouth on that seems like he's really kind of, maybe any doubt that that it was him, it's kind of going out the window when he's basically confirming all that.
And look, and I want people to know this because I know people are really concerned about this case. If it is the case that all they have is what's in the affidavit, then what they have is this guy essentially putting himself at the scene, wearing the clothes that the guy was wearing, doing all the things that people said the guy was doing, and the bullet, right? Like the bullet, and we talk about this all the time, that one piece of evidence can be the thing. If that bullet came from his gun, he's guilty. And the bullet is the thing that takes him from just being there and looking just like Bridge Guy and being on the bridge and being weird and everything else to being with the girls. So even if this is all they have, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not enough. A good defense attorney is going to have, if that's all they have, it's going to have a pretty good time with this case, but the prosecution could still win in the end.
Yeah. And, you know, some of you, I think, are saying this in the chat, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this too. This all sounds really bad, right, for law enforcement. Again, I go back to what Brett and I say all the time. They were overwhelmed, and there is a such thing as too many cooks in the kitchen. When you have, it's better honestly to have 1 or 2 agents on a case than to have 150 agents, because who knows who was taking this interview. It could have been literally like the intern who was taking the interview, and there are so many reports being written up every single day that the top agent in charge, and by the way, who's in charge? We don't even know which jurisdiction's in charge. So there may be 5 different guys with slight turf wars going on, saying, I have to get my form written up in this type of a form, and this guy wants this form written up in this type of form. We see that in different agencies. They literally want a particular form for their reports, that these reports may not have been read up to the highest levels. And so I don't think this was we had all the information and we fell down on the job. I think truly everyone was tripping over themselves, trying to cast too wide of a net, trying to do too much without any sort of a focal point in where the investigation funneled into. It may sound like it's, there's stopgaps, but you need those stopgaps. Otherwise, things like this very good interview fall through the cracks until someone goes and re-reviews and says, wait a second, this doesn't sound right. Let's reinvestigate this. Why is this the one follow-up question that we had here? There's so much more here.
And there is a danger of too many tips. That is absolutely a danger, because somebody probably looked at that report and thought, oh, not a big deal. We found the 3 girls. There's nothing here, right? And then it's sat aside. And then we talk about this, cold case units. One thing they do for this very reason is they start over. Periodically, they just start over. And they reread every single report, and they go talk to witnesses who've already been talked to. And I bet that some guy was reading this and was like, oh my goodness, this seems pretty significant. Maybe we should look at this guy. Now, what I would be interested to know, if you guys have an opinion on, is the thing that's still kind of hanging out there is the whole Keegan Kline Instagram, or not Instagram, or whatever he was, the Anthony Shots account. I mean, is it possible that the girls are being catfished by a sexual predator and then murdered by someone who was completely unrelated?
At this point, maybe. I'm kidding. You guys answer this because you actually know.
It's a good question, because on the one hand, I think we've heard from detectives that we speak to that coincidences do exist and they do happen in cases. It's not, people kind of have a hard time accepting that, but weird stuff has happened and certainly can happen. That being said,
we know from behind the scenes, they're still very much looking for a connection between the murders and Keegan Kline. They haven't seemed to found one yet, at least nothing they can lock down. It's interesting. In court the other day, the prosecutor made a point of saying, we believe there are other actors involved in this. When you read this probable cause affidavit, again, they may have more evidence, but when you read the affidavit itself, it almost makes it sound like Richard Allen was the only guy out there that day. You have witnesses seeing one person acting strange before the crime. You have witnesses seeing a person with blood on him go into his vehicle after the crime. There's no indication of other parties. So who are these other actors and what is their involvement in the crime?
Well, I mean, and you have to wonder if there's some sort of ring that's behind Anthony Shots, right? Like that's been some speculation. Is it a situation where people involved in that are directly involved with like a physical attack and the murder of the girls? Or are they involved behind the scenes? Is this something that maybe is a wider, I hate to use the word conspiracy, but if you have a bunch of people who are doing something like this and maybe then somebody takes it too far in real life and it kind of leads to this situation. That's, I think, up in the air at this point. It'll ultimately depend, do they have the evidence to charge other people with this? I mean, they've come out and stated that they basically think other people are involved. So it's not a matter of, do they think that at this point? It's a matter of what will they actually get to be able to put handcuffs on somebody else and say, you participated in this in some way. And also we'll note, he's not charged. I mean, he's charged with basically felony murder. They did not say in this affidavit, here's how we think he killed the girls, or here's exactly what we think happened after he led them off the bridge. It's pretty vague. So we're not really getting a clear motive from this. We're not getting a clear breakdown of what exactly happened with the murders. And we're certainly not getting, did he target them? Was this just he was going to go after anyone who crossed the bridge? What exactly happened with that? But I mean, from behind the scenes was definitely obviously a big push to possibly get more people who may have been involved in this, which again, just makes it even more out there and kind of difficult to cover because it's brawling. And you kind of get the sense, frankly, that they were caught off guard by this development by Alan. And that's really interesting.
And we talked about, and when we did the thing, that it could just be somebody who he just went out there often with the intention that one day he was going to find the perfect victim. And so he went prepared, and this was the day he found him. Having said that, he seems like he was on a mission, right? He seems like he knew exactly where he was going. And the whole Kagan Klein thing, and they were that he had talked to them and they were supposed to meet him there that day. I mean, it's just, I know coincidences happen. We say this all the time, but what a coincidence.
Here's something that brings it down from just coincidence or massive conspiracy child sex ring. We know something about Richard Allen and Keegan Klein. They were over 18 men who showed a preference for underage girls in the tween ages. We know that much about them. This is a small community. These communities talk, and they know how to talk in ways that are covert because it's illegal to do this. And, Brett and I investigate these cases all the time. The dark web is a thing. The encrypted messaging world is a thing. And one thing that this kind of cohort does a lot, they like to brag, because there's usually pretty sad characters who don't get to carry out their fantasies very often, because if they did, they usually get caught. A lot of these crimes are pre-crimes, right? A lot of these child sex crimes are planning, bragging. I've gotten this girl to talk, like talking about people in a really salacious and inappropriate manner, especially underage girls, on these websites that are covert from law enforcement and from kind of the public eye. So if these two people who we know live very close to each other in a very small town, where this small town is, I think, like most small towns, this type of behavior is not okay in any town that I know of, but certainly not in a small town where everyone knows each other. And so they likely know that the other exists, even if they don't know their real names or real faces. They know generally who these people are in their community, and they may be bragging about what they've done. I got so-and-so to talk to me. She's even going to meet me. Keegan could have just been bragging because he's stupid. And this is what we see people do. We get so many people in where we start interviewing them. We're like, these are disgusting text messages that you have. And they're like, dude, it was all big talk. Of course I didn't touch anyone. I'm a sad sack who lives in my parents' basement. I never touched that girl. I talk that way because this is the only way I can brag about what I do. And we see that more often than not, and it bears out. They've never touched a young girl. They've never actually carried out their crimes. But the way they text and the way they post and brag online seems like they are out there committing heinous sexual crimes against young, children all the time. So it could potentially be, taking it out of the coincidence world, out of the crazy conspiracy world where they're all working together behind scenes, Keegan could have just been stupid and posted a snapshot of his conversation with them and been like, I got two girls coming to meet me. He never was going to go because he's a sad guy who never carries out what he's going to do. But someone saw that and was like, that's an opportunity. I'm going to do this.
I think that's a very plausible scenario based on what we know about these characters involved, and like the fact that Kegan seemed to be very invested in becoming a bit of a, developing some of this child sexual abuse materials himself, and possibly, as you can see in the transcript with the cops basically reading his transcripts, talking to other pedophiles, basically offering, oh, here's what I have, what do you have? So he's making these connections, he's starting this kind of path, and where do you go from there? And I'll note this about Anthony Schatz. Anthony Schatz talked to girls in that part of Indiana. He wasn't talking to kids in California or New York, which you almost would think, because it's like very far away, right? He's talking to kids locally, and that's another thing that kind of is interesting, because what is the benefit of talking to kids locally in the mind of a child predator? Well, you have access to them. You have easier access in real life, not just online. So that's something that gives us some pause. And I would say that in terms of, Richard Allen is based in Delphi. And then, Keegan Klein was based in Peru, and they're about like 40 minutes away from each other. They're not right next to each other. We asked a lot of people in the Peru area, do people move to Delphi a lot? And they're like, no. So that's kind of interesting. just some, like small town politics. But at the same time, Richard Allen was from Mexico, Indiana, which is right outside of Peru. So he's actually from right outside the area where Kegan Kline is. So he does have, we talked to a lot of people in Mexico, and they basically were able to kind of tell us about his background and whatnot. He really didn't raise any red flags, frankly, but on the surface for normal people who were not involved in this stuff, obviously. But it's interesting that he kind of did come from that area and then moved to Delphi.
One thing I'd be interested in your take. We've talked about some of these witnesses, and for those of you who haven't read the affidavit, it goes through a number of the witnesses that we had sort of vaguely heard about through rumors. I mean, it basically confirms every rumor you ever heard about a witness who saw him, right? I mean, the one girl who she said hi, and he, didn't even look at her. He looked at her and snarled at her or whatever, kept going. Well, that's in the affidavit, right? The one that's interesting to me, that's most interesting to me, and I assume is most interesting to everyone, is the person who saw him, whoever it is, walking down the road back towards the building, bloody and muddy, like they'd been in a fight. And that person, and times are all over the place, and people often get times wrong, but that person said that was around 4:00 in the afternoon, which is a little bit later than I would have expected. I mean, that's almost 2 hours after they videoed him. Right. I mean, that was like 2:12 or something along those lines. So that's a little bit later than I would have thought. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'd be interested in where that witness was when this witness made those observations. Was this witness in a car driving by, or was this witness walking themselves, or were they in like some sort of position where they were observing the road from a non-moving position? Because it would be difficult for me if I'm driving past someone to be able to ascertain whether it's stains on a shirt are from blood or from mud or almost anything else. That's one thing that jumped out at me about that.
And I think that, for me, if that is a sighting of like this, this is Bridge Guy, which it certainly sounds like, and it sounds exactly what, the FBI wrote in the affidavit on Ron Logan's property. Like, this guy got bloody. Like, this was a very violent crime, and it would have shown on the perpetrator. For me, it's like, you're covered in blood, you look like you've been in a fight, and you're kind of coming out in broad daylight in front of people. That is so bold and like just totally not what you'd think if you're dealing, having done something so horrible, you'd be hiding and kind of like skulking around. But it's like the fact that he got seen is just shocking.
But maybe going back to the timeline, it's entirely possible that the murders happened relatively quickly. He's covered in blood. He's scared. And he thinks it's safer for the moment to remain in the woods. But then when you get closer to 4:00, you have Libby's dad coming. You have people start making a commotion. So maybe at that point, he just feels the safest thing for me to do is just to get out of here.
And it's always been crazy. It's been crazy to everybody that this case has not been solved. And the main reason was because of the video. But one of the things Alice and I talked about, and I'm sure y'all talked about as well, is the fact that this person would have been covered in blood, and it did seem in the mud is another thing, because it seemed like there was something that happened around the river, the creek or whatever. And it was one reason some people thought maybe they parked in the graveyard, because they would have needed to be able to get away, because otherwise people would see somebody walking around with blood all over them. And apparently somebody did. And I don't know, it must have just been the guy just ran the gauntlet of perfection when he left. He just got so lucky that he was able to avoid anyone seeing him who would just be able to identify him. I mean, this guy lives in the town, right? That's the other thing that's just strange. I mean, it turns out there were a lot of people who saw him, but nobody identified him, at least initially. And I know his face was all covered up and everything, but...
And he's someone who people know because of where he works. That's also really interesting, which is why he had his face covered. But Brett, that goes to the whole point that we talked about. He hunted these grounds. He knew exactly where his out was. He knew exactly how to get out without being seen or to be minimally seen. And in fact, he was, because like we said, this is his backyard. If I'm walking it, I'm not going to know the best ways to get out, the ways to walk where I'm going to avoid people, or the ways to walk with purpose, so that even if I were covered in mud or blood, that I don't attract attention. Because there's ways that you move. We do this behavioral analysis with our witnesses all the time. There are ways that you move. The exact same words can come out of your mouth, but how it's perceived is very different. Confidence goes a long way. That's why like a good BSer goes a long way, and so we of course, we try to reserve some judgment here, because we're reading what he said on paper, it's very different when you're being told it in person and there is a way of delivery. I bet the way this guy walked, I mean, all these people who saw him, I don't know for a fact, but I don't think all of these witnesses who saw him said, and for sure, he is the guy who was in that video, because they couldn't say that. And it may have been because he carries himself differently in the world than he did then. Like he knew how to look at people or not look at people so that they, even if someone said hi, they go, right? We all know how to do that. You're in the airport. You don't really want to make small talk. You know how to kind of put on those blinders so that people know not to talk to you. And he was successful in doing that, I think, multiple times. So in some ways, he was able to be a chameleon because he knew how to be a chameleon, even if others saw him. But the way he acted made them doubt what they were seeing.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's like, I think people have, oh, wow, how did no one in Delphi recognize him from the sketch or the video? And it's like, it's very blurry video. It's helpful to see what the guy's generally wearing. It's not that it's meaningless. It's certainly helpful, but you can't really see a face necessarily. The sketch is a sketch. There's 2 sketches floating around. And ultimately that, I think, people kind of, it's one thing for us all like, oh, who could it be on the internet? But it's another thing to like go up to the CVS manager that you've known, to talk to for years and say, you did it. I mean, that's a really high bar to cross and possibly ruin somebody's life who doesn't deserve it. So I think ultimately, hopefully this case is a good lesson for everyone that those kind of things can be helpful. They're absolutely tools that investigators can use to get answers, but they're not everything. And they're not necessarily great evidence without other things, also coming forward, I guess.
So I think there's more. I think there's more evidence, but that's just my sort of gut feeling on it. And you guys on the ground, I mean, do you get the sense that they do have other bullets in their gun, as it were, that they're going to be able to use at trial?
It's hard to say. I think probably, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic than Kevin is right now. I think they probably do, but I will say the amount of secrecy that they seem to be trying to put on this is a little bit, I don't know why this wasn't just unsealed right away, I guess. And that's kind of where I'm like, the problem when they try to do this and clamp down on all information is that then just a lot of speculation and, everyone's worrying around without really knowing what's going on. And I get that they have to keep certain things. Frankly, we had the bullet stuff. We sat on it because we were like, we don't want to, mess anything up, basically. But now that it's out there, it's kind of like, what? I don't know. I'm rambling. It's just been a whole thing.
Yeah, we're glad you guys made time for us because we're at least important on your resume, I'm sure. Kevin, I do have a question for you that maybe you can answer. Bail hearing, bond hearing, not until February. That seems like a really long time between when the bond hearing is requested and when it's going to be held. Is that just an Indiana thing, or do you see some significance in that?
No, it does seem to be an extraordinarily long time. For what it's worth, when it was discussed in court, it seemed primarily just to be a case of all of the lawyers and the judges having a little bit of a difficult time finding a space on their calendars where they could all make it happen.
Yeah. They were literally like that. You'd have one of the defense attorneys. Well, like I'm booked for all that week in January, and then the judge is like, "Oh, early February." Does that, and so
the judge brought out this big thick book and said, "I have murder trials every week."
These are all my murder trials, and so
if I was the defendant, I'd be like, "Come on, guys, it's 3 months."
and they're saying
we can work on weekends.
These guys in the media, these defense attorneys, they're very sharp guys. Obviously, they're going and saying this guy is factually innocent. This is a horrible miscarriage of justice. Like, I guess he could just stay in prison until
for 3 months.
For 3 months, yeah, that was jarring.
And do we think that I assume there'll be a probable cause hearing at some point. Do we think that will sort of coincide with the bond hearing, or do you think it'll be held separately?
I think that's likely to coincide with the bond hearing because they're going to set aside most of a day for the bond hearing.
Yeah, now they're going to have to also do this change of venue situation. We're going to be very curious. If
these defense attorneys are very sharp.
Very well respected in Indiana. One is from out of town. He's from Franklin, which is the south of Indianapolis, and, has a lot of experience. And then the other one, Rosie, is from Logansport. And again, very, very qualified. So one thing that we've been hearing locally is that they're both very highly regarded. And, it's not like a public defender who's like overburdened with a ton of cases. Like,
And seeing them in court, we could tell for ourselves that these guys are very sharp.
they were very prepared.
Yeah. We did an episode on them that maybe one day we'll release if news ever stops happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. On the change of venue, did they ask for a specific venue, or is it just sort of open?
They said they wanted it to be taken to a place that was at least 150 miles away
Okay, so and
from
like
Delphi.
and I did the geography. I'm not a cartographer, but I was literally on the websites doing like a big circle, and you can't go north, you can't go east or west. You're going to be in Illinois, Lake Michigan, or Ohio. So basically, it's the southern edge of Indiana. And it's basically like along the Ohio River, bordering Kentucky, the Louisville market, or Evansville. So, I mean, like, that's basically, we have a very narrow, if they get what they want, then it's going to really just go all the way south.
Well, look, I mean, I don't know if people have questions in the gallery here and they want to ask something real fast, you can. I don't want to keep you guys too long. And Alice has been traveling from Alaska since like 3 days ago. You know, she started with
Basically.
the dog sled team took her to pick up the puddle jumper, which took her to an airport, to a train. Who knows? Who knows how?
Not inaccurate.
But is there anything else that we haven't talked about you think we should?
Gosh, that's a good question.
Obviously, we weren't surprised by the change of venue request. It's very likely to be granted. It's not necessarily a sure thing. They certainly did a great job of establishing a lot of potentially prejudicial pretrial publicity, but they didn't necessarily go into, I went and looked back. There was another person of interest in this case, Chadwell, and the lawyers in that case asked for a change of venue, and that was declined because the judge in that case said, no, you have to go beyond mere prejudicial publicity. You have to prove that the jury pool is made up of people who be incapable of changing their minds and make their decisions based only on what's heard in the courtroom. So I don't know if what the attorneys in this case wrote necessarily passes that bar, but I do think it's likely that it will be changed.
Another something somebody mentioned in the chat is, there's a gag order request that's been put out, and that's another thing that kind of got lost in some of the shuffle. But basically, the prosecutor is saying he wants the families of the victims, law enforcement and the defense attorneys to be under a gag order, which would mean that they could not speak publicly on the case. And that has not been approved yet, but it did strike us as a little interesting happening, so quickly after the prosecution has, of course, had a microphone and, a giant bullhorn to kind of, talk about how they arrested this guy and they got him. But, that's just my take a little bit. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to be supportive of the prosecution and their efforts. So.
You guys are the prosecutors.
I won't criticize their constant need for secrecy in everything they do.
Yes, it's very secret. But, we understand it to a certain extent. I think, we're definitely respectful that certain things would be damaging for, to be coming out in the wrong way or to be leaked to the press. Then again, I think it's a situation where this is a pretty small county, Carroll County. Like they don't have like a designated media person on this for the prosecutor's office. So I feel like they probably need something like that just to help streamline all this insanity, because otherwise I think the defense attorneys really know what they're doing when they're talking to the media, and you don't want to get left behind necessarily.
And I think we all agree the chances of this trial happening next year are probably slim.
Oh,
yeah.
That was what, in the hearing, they were actually talking about that, and they're like, we were shocked. I mean, the defense was like, yeah, you can leave it on the books for March for now. And I think everyone was kind of like, okay, like that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. Yeah. I mean, as we said, the bond hearing's in February. So, I don't think there'll be a trial. But, well, look, guys, I mean, number one, I want to thank y'all for always sending me these documents that I can't get my hands on, because Indiana, for some reason, has this system that you can see what's filed, but you can't actually pull it. And I noticed they have this like prejudice for Indiana lawyers. If you're an Indiana lawyer, you can get the other thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you for providing those to us.
Yeah, just let us know if you ever need anything, because sometimes that's how we find out, where people are like, can you send us this? And we're like, oh my goodness, like what happened?
Yeah. Alice, you got anything else before we get out of here?
No, thank you guys so much for joining us. It's so helpful to have your perspective.
Thanks for having us. And you guys had some really great insights, and we always appreciate talking to you guys and getting that.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having
Obviously,
me.
if you're not listening to the murder sheet, you need to listen to the murder sheet. Jason just showed up. If you're not listening to Santa May Be a Criminal, you need to listen to that too. And of course, you should continue to listen to our podcast. But well, that's all we got for tonight. We'll be back later. I'm not even sure what podcast this is anymore, but until next time, I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and this is one of the prosecutors' podcasts.
Come on. Come do something with me.
Taking the kids down to the Riverwalk sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, I know, but it's an activity.
Why don't you let me know when you're headed out?
What are you gonna do with your kids
How
then?
the kids are. Well, fun. Hanging around the house.
Kids don't do well with that. Your kids
Mine
do.
are
They're
much
awesome.
more relaxed.
Yeah, they are. Rub it in my face. Why don't you?
We'll see. Like I said, we'll see where they're at. If it's a nice day and they're bouncing around.